Hey guys, welcome to this month's episode of the Made to Win podcast. I'm excited because I get to interview one of my great friends and Pastor Joel Delph. I want to take a minute though to let you guys know we did have some audio issues on this episode. So if you're listening in your headphones or you're not watching the video, but you're just trying to listen to the audio quality may be not very good. But we do want you to know that we went ahead and the episode was so good and we didn't find out the issue until after we recorded the episode. So audio is going to be basically from the cameras and not the audio we normally record. So we do apologize for any inconveniences, but you're still going to love this episode of the Made to Win podcast. So check it out, our interview with Pastor Joel Delph. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Made to Win podcast, and I am beyond stoked for this month's episode because I get to talk to an incredible man of God. It's a lie. Pastor Joel Delph, and it's been an incredible 10 years of friendship with my friend Joel, and we'll talk more about our journey together and kind of what he means to me and my family and our church. But I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, where you come from, all those things, your fam, all those things.
So, hey everybody, my name is Joel Delph. Me in 10 seconds. Gave my life to Christ at the age of 6, 18, went off to college, and then started to realize why Jesus saves people and what that does for your heart and for your soul. Yeah. And got to meet my wife at the age of 25, and we've been married for over almost 12 years. We'll be 12 years this April. We've got 4 kids, and I've gotten to do all sorts of things in life, and I've gotten to spend about 8 years of my life in the corporate world and 8 years of my life in the church world, and so I've gotten to work for banks and Elevation Church, and right now I get to serve at an amazing church in Charleston, South Carolina called Seacost Church, and just loving life. I'm just trying to not mess it all up. I think that's me. I think that's it. That's all I got.
I think that's ministry in general, right? Yes. Trying not to mess it up. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty cool because I guess it was more than 10 years ago because it was the fall of 2011.
Yep.
You might be able to remember the month because it was the same weekend you guys launched 2 campuses at Elevation Church, and you had only been on staff for like
10 days.
Was it 10 days?
Yeah, day 11 or 12, something like that. Yeah.
So here's this guy. You know, I'm getting ready to plant a church in Hillbilly, USA, and I randomly email the website Elevation, like, hey, bringing a team down. We actually went to the leadership conference at New Spring that Thursday, drove to Charlotte Friday.
So good.
Oh man, it was phenomenal. And we were like, hey, let's just go to Charlotte for the weekend and we'll go to like every Elevation experience possible. Like we're just gonna hit up every campus we can.
Try them all.
Yeah. And so it was so funny because we're like, maybe somebody will email us back. I don't know. We're just like, hey, if anybody from the staff will be willing to just chat with us for a few minutes, answer some questions, we would be awesome. You guys are an influence to us, all those things. And it was cool because because I have emailed churches before and you just get ghosted. It's just like, we're not talking to those guys.
It's crazy how you get in ministry for people, but then you don't have time for people.
Bro, that's an episode right there.
That's a whole other episode.
That's a whole other episode. So, but somebody emailed back, like, hey, yeah, if you'll come here at this time on Friday, somebody will meet with you or whatever. So we go, and it's funny because I think, kind of like you guys, we're off on Fridays. We give everybody a Sabbath day on Friday, and most of the staff was supposed to be off. But since you guys were launching 2 campuses that weekend, like everybody was just, it was
on
chaos, yeah. So we walk in, and what was funny is we pull it. This is probably the funny story, and he's actually coming at the end of this month, so I can't wait to bring this up because he probably don't remember it. But Wade Joy is actually walking out of the building. I think he has his kids with him or whatever, and they're just trying to leave and go enjoy a Friday, and we're all just like, it's Wade Joy. We're just 15 creepers walking up to Wade. I could just see the terror on his face, what's about to happen right now. So, but we were just we were just so excited to be in a place that
had impacted us so much,
Yeah.
And we got to meet John Bishop,
The John Bishop,
Larry Bry,
the Larry Bry,
and which was funny because everybody remembers our interaction with him most.
Of course.
Because he split us all up into two groups.
Like wheat from chaff.
Yeah, and he's like, you guys aren't going to be here in a year. You guys are like, well, and it was just like, but wait a minute, that's his wife. She needs to be on this side. Like, it was so funny. But, and then we got to meet, of course, you. And it was awesome because I think in the following weeks and even months, it was cool how, like, you would text, check up on us and things like that. And then, of course, through Inside Elevation and stuff like that, we just started, like, hooking up more and hanging out, having coffee, meeting with the team. And man, over the years, I want you to know, like, it started with a, hey, we just want to glean from your leadership, but I really enjoy gleaning from your life because I believe you're an incredible man. And one day when I grow up, I want to be Joel Delph.
These are all eyes. And on my side of the spectrum is one of the things I'll never forget is your hunger. And I could tell that you were and you are a student. And so I got a list here and I'm sharing it for tonight. Tonight is actually a revival here at Generation. And 10 years, and I've got this list of 10 things. I'm not going to go through them right now, but one of the things that I saw then that 10 years later is still true is that you're a student of all, but you're an imitation of no one. And you have this ability to learn from others, but then figure out, what does that mean for me? And there's a lot of people who will try to learn from others by trying to replicate the miracle, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can learn from a miracle, but then God has to do special work in your life that may look vastly different.
Wow.
And so the thing I've seen with you for the last 10 years is you learn from everybody, but then you say, well, what does that mean for Portland? And you're not trying to grab the mic to change the world. You're trying to grab the mic to change Portland, and then everything flows out of that. And so I don't even know where you're listening to this podcast today, but one of the things I want to say about my friend, Pastor Brandon Petty, is he's sold out for reaching a community that you may never come into, and he's not trying to do it for clout. He's not trying to do it for followers. He's not trying to do it for likes. He's not trying to build a plane and do all that stuff. If God brings that stuff to him, that'll be to his surprise.
Yeah.
But then I think God really specializes in using people who are faithful in the unseen. And so that's one of the cool things that I've just seen in your life that makes me honored to be here tonight. It makes me honored to like walk around you and be around you, because I think the next 10 years, we're both going to be shocked with what God's going to do through your heart and through the lives of people you serve and lead alongside. Not because you're worthy of it, but because you're willing to put yourself as a servant of your dream. And so many times we want to be the center of our dream, but when we start serving that dream that God's placed inside of us, it's a whole other level. I really don't know how to do podcasts, and I don't do first dates well. I don't know if I'm supposed to like, make jokes and talk about the weather, but we're just going to go in right now.
Let's go, man. It's so good. Gosh, it's so good. Man, that means a lot. I think, and it's crazy because we were just talking about, we're celebrating 10 years this weekend. Today, we launched the church on March 4th, 2012. And I always tell people it's like a tale of two churches. Like the first 5 years, you just feel like, you always use the analogy of having a baby or a child, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, first 5 years, like, how do we not, like, crap ourselves all the time? You know what I mean? Like, you're just trying to figure out how to get out of diapers, but you're like aware that you're in diapers. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And a lot of it is, and man, I've had so many like friends that I've watched go through this season too and navigate it, but I think there's such a pressure. I feel like we planted in a season where church planting was like this sexy thing to do. And it seemed like every person I talked to, like, it's just like, well, I'm not happy here, so maybe I should start a church. And like for the first 5 years, I would tell people like, you don't run,
Right.
Because it was so, but like there was a moment where God took me on this journey to get healthy myself. And I feel like the last 5 years have been so rewarding and refreshing for me and my family. I always tell people like, that one of the testimonies and markers for us for success is that our kids love Jesus, love the local church, and actually love people.
That's good. That's good.
So
how do you figure out that journey of getting healthy? Because some people, they spend a lifetime of saying I'm getting healthy when they're really just trying to figure out ways to run from responsibility, run from hard things. But what does that even mean for you to be healthy?
Man, I'm telling you, this is where God took me. It's the scripture where Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, right? Come to me, all you who are heavy laden. And it's amazing because he says, I'm going to take a burden off of you.
That's good.
But I'm going to use the analogy of work. Like, how is that? Like, I can almost imagine being one of those fishermen, right? Being like, wait a minute, what? Like, but when you think about what Jesus is conveying is like, there's already a weight we carry in this world.
Yeah.
Whether it's work, marriage, family, whatever. And the problem is that I think even pastors, people in ministry, followers of Jesus in general, something has happened along our way in our journey where no matter how hard we try not to fall into this trap, there is this trap of, in order for me to be loved by God and to be used by God, I have to work really hard at it. And Jesus has given us the key from the beginning of saying, like, listen, when you hook up with me, like for real with me, not hook up with church or hook up with religion or hook up with ministry, but when you hook up with me, I show you a different way to carry the weight.
That's good.
Like we tell people, like, don't lift with your back, right? Lift with your legs.
Right.
Because it's telling people you can actually pick up heavier weight when you do it correctly. And so when people talk about getting healthy, in their back of their mind, what they're really saying is, I've got to find something else to do in order to feel better about the state that I'm in.
Yes.
Instead of like, why? Here's what I tell people all the time is God does not need me to grow his church.
Right.
Here's the cool part is that he loves me so much. He's like, I would love to partner with you to do it.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to be a part of what I want to do. So
That's
for me,
good.
about 3 or 4 years ago, I finally let go of not only the pressure, but the desire to grow Jesus' church. Because if I'm honest with myself, there was a thing in that first 5 years that was like, this hinges on me. I have to grow this thing. I have to come up with the next best idea. I have to preach the right message. I have to say the right things. I've got to make the right tweet, the right post, the right... Yes. And there's something so liberating when you realize I'm still doing the work.
Right.
I'm just yoked up to something different now.
That's good. And one of the things I've been thinking about while you're talking about it is habit over harvest. And so let me break that down for a second. Like, sometimes we focus on the harvest, what we want to happen.
Yes.
And when you focus on that, then you shortcut steps in the process to get there. So i.e., if you're a businessman and you think that success is being wealthy, then what will happen is you'll consciously and subconsciously pursue what you think wealthy people have to get there. So this is the businessman who will lie to himself and say, well, I need that truck for work.
Yeah.
And so they buy the $120,000, Ford F-450 with everything in it, but it's good for business. It's like, no, it ain't, bro. You're trying to feed your pride. And so you buy the house before you really can afford it, or you swipe with the card because you think it's what you wear.
Yeah.
Conversely, the best people know it's all about the habits that you have, the things you do consistently over time. And one of the gifts through the tragedy of Kobe dying is all of these mythical stories that are popping up on social media with people who are talking about, hey, I just finished a game against Kobe and I went to work out and he was working out. And then when I thought I had a good workout and went back to the shower to get ready to go home, he was still working.
Yeah.
And there was a man who was so sold out to the habit that the harvest was just a byproduct of it.
Yeah.
And so
that was Jay Williams.
Yes. And there's so many different stories I'm seeing all the time about people just sharing it. And the sad thing is sometimes you don't respect people until they're gone.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic. But those habits are things that we can control.
Yeah.
But the harvest is a thing that God can control. What are just one or two simple habits that you maintain as a leader to make sure that you're healthy?
Oh man, obviously, three big ones. One, I get up at 4 a.m. every day and spend the first hour with God. Journal. My first thing in my journal to do is write down at least 5 things I'm grateful for that morning. I just believe gratitude sets your attitude. It sets your attitude for the day, it sets your attitude for the week. And then I have a verse that I meditate on. I'm reading through whatever in the Bible, but I'll have one verse that I'm just like, hey, I need to chew on this for today. But I'm telling you, like, time just in silence and just the quiet, it has been life-changing for me because I think we are so addicted to noise that if we don't have that time of silence and solitude, I just feel like we're always trying to feed into more busyness. So I love to be able to be the person. I'm not always there, but the person that says, when they say, like, I know you're really busy. No, I'm not busy. I just have boundaries,
Right.
And there's a difference.
Yes.
I don't have to say yes to everything.
Yes.
But I also don't have to be busy.
Right.
But then I go to the gym. So I'm at the gym by 5 a.m. every morning. I'm usually there for about an hour and a half. And so those are 3 keystone habits to start my day at least. But those are important. And then of course, I try to segment my day throughout the day so that way that I can give whatever I'm doing, I give my best to, and that's just what I believe is, I may not get everything done on my quote unquote list, but if I can give my best to whatever I'm working on that moment, that's important. I think people always think of their lives as compartmentalized, right? It's like, I have my job, I have my family, I have this, but it's all one. It's just, how do I make my entire being be yoked up with Jesus, and with the fruit of that feed into my family.
That's good.
Feed into my leadership.
That's good.
All those things.
I think. Let me break that down for us normal people out there, because this man just started talking about 4 a.m. and then an hour workout where he's praying while squatting. It's all about Jesus, but then it's all about the depth of the squat. Like, big habits in our life start with small decisions, and so maybe for you, the decision is start your day 5 minutes earlier, and then before you hop in the shower, read the verse of the day on the Bible app. And I think there's something special with small little decisions because they will grow. And so if you start with a small little decision, I'm just going to try it for 5 minutes, then it'll grow. And the fruit of that is when your body and your life starts getting addicted to healthy things, then that's what will set autopilot on.
No, you're right. I mean, I think even the silence thing, I started with 5 minutes.
That's so
just set a timer, sit there, and you know what? Most of the time my brain, I couldn't turn it off. But like over weeks and months, I think I'm up to 15 minutes now.
Yes.
It's still not a lot of time, but now I'm like, I'm in it more. I'm in it better.
Here's something that I also do when I'm trying to learn from somebody is I try to watch what they do, and then I'm like, well, why do they do that? Your blue Dodge Dakota is still outside there.
Yeah.
What do you do with your money? Yeah, we want to talk about some real stuff today. Talk about just some things you do with your money.
I love it. No, it's actually we met with a financial advisor today, just because we were at a place in our life where I wasn't taught how to manage your money. I grew up with a poverty mindset, and most people think a poverty mindset means you don't have money, but a poverty mindset just means you have a mindset that even if you have money, you don't have money. because it's not about the dollar amount you make. It's your perception of what money is and what it's used for. And so having a poverty mindset, my family always had the mindset of, if you have it, you better spend it because it's going to disappear. That's the poverty mindset. So you can make $100,000 a year, but still be in major debt because your mindset is that if I have it, it's the $100,000 truck, right? It's that decision of where, like, hey, I gotta have this, but really your mindset is, if I don't buy this, I'll never have it, and I've gotta have it because my money's gonna disappear anyways, right?
So good.
So when we got married, I got married at 25. My wife grew up in a different environment. Like, she grew up in a very tight, her grandfather grew up in the Great Depression. 7 kids, all took a bath in the same water.
Yes.
Same bath water.
Yes.
So that mindset creeped into her dad. He would literally tell his kids, hey, 3 squares. I'm like, bro, how in the world can you three squares of toilet paper? I'll let you guys that are listening, I'll let you do the imagination.
Miracles, people.
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about bread and loaves and fishes type stuff, right? Like, I don't know how you do that with toilet paper. But that's the mindset that my wife grew up in.
Yeah.
So both can be toxic, because my wife has a mindset of, like, if we have money, we need to not spend it, but set it over here and just save it, so that way we don't, because a woman wants safety, right? Men want to solve all the problems. Women want safety, security. So when we got married, we went through, thank God placed us under some pastoral leadership that, number one, taught me about tithing and giving and generosity, because I had been a believer for 8 years, had never given a dime, just didn't know, was never challenged in the church that I came from, all those things. So they walked us through how to get out of debt. They walked us through some Dave Ramsey stuff. But so now, I think by the time so in 5 years, we were debt free except for our home, and we were able to now start shifting our focus toward investing. And so our concept is, we just tell ourselves we never want to have a car payment. So if we find a used vehicle, we'll drive it until the wheels fall off. Good. And because we're going to keep on, and we take care of our vehicles too. Oil change, rotate tires, do those things. So for us, it's not about, and it was hard for me. It was a shift for me, because as a teenager, I was in debt a lot. I remember I had the Z28 Camaro. Yeah. But I really put our marriage starting out in a hurt because I was in so much debt when I got married over vehicles, stupid stuff. I had no idea about this is how ignorant I was. When I first got my own place, I went to Rooms to Go or something, and they're like, hey, guess what? 0 interest, 0 payments for a whole year. Joe, are you kidding me? Yeah. I don't have to pay. This is free furniture? Yep. For a year. And but after a year, I'm like, yeah. But I'll probably pay it off in that year. Before then, yeah. 12 months later, how much money did I put down on
0.
0. And then you get the payment for your first, and it's like, dude, this is like a fourth of what the whole furniture was supposed, Yep. So then I spent the next 2 years paying off furniture. It was just, those are the type of mistakes that I made.
The financial institutions of the world know you.
Yeah.
And they bet on you.
Yes.
Prioritizing you. And someone said once is, accounting is theology and numbers. And you can tell what you believe by where you spend your money.
Yeah.
And I think if you look through your bank account as a real life testimony in your belief systems, it's kind of shocking. You're like, dang, I invest in a lot of things that don't really matter.
Yeah.
And so I think the game changer is when we can find ways to just own our life with our finances, so that we can step into purpose. We can step into what God may want us to do. We can tell our boss, you know what, you're unhealthy, I gotta go. Or I do need to start something.
Well, it's so good, because now it has shifted my whole mindset to where the mindset, the Americanized mindset is okay, I need to work toward not working. But for me, my whole definition of retirement has been flipped on its head, because for me, retirement is free from obligation, not free from work. And so how can I keep investing my life in a way to where one day I don't just sit around and do nothing, but I can say yes to God on a much larger scale, where maybe in my 60s I'm doing a greater work for God than I ever did in my first 50 years.
I prayed for a guy Wednesday night who retired 2 years ago, and he said, I have no purpose in my life, and we got to pray over it. But I thought, how sad is it that he's been freed to live life any way he chooses, but because the pattern of his life was that someone else owned his vision, that when he was given the keys to run it, it's like, wow, I don't know what to do. And, that's what happened with the Israelites, and that's why God gave the Israelites the law. He gave them the law to teach them how to be free, because there were 16 generations of Egyptian captivity, and they didn't know what to do. So God had to give them the law to teach them how to be free. And I think that's a really good mindset to understand that freedom is something you always have to teach yourself.
That is so good. Well, and we forget, because like what they struggled with wasn't even the fact that it wasn't the physical freedom, right? It was the mental
bondage.
Mental bondage. I mean, you think about when Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. And he talks about this tree that birds live in. So the problem I even run into with people is, like, I'll talk to young guys who are like, man, all right, I'm going to be in full-time ministry. I see I want to do what you do and all this stuff. Well, they're seeing the birds in the tree, right? But they're not willing to, like, start with this thing, this little seed. Because what I see guys do, especially men, because I think men are in a hurry to discover this purpose in their life, right? To discover this thing. They want to be successful. They want to do all these things. And the problem is, okay, I'll just use this guy as an example. He's like, now I want to be in ministry, yada, yada, yada. All right, well, here's some opportunities for you to start out. But it's like, it doesn't pay well. There's not very many benefits.
Yes.
And then he gets married and he starts working at a place that he doesn't necessarily want to spend his life doing. But now he's living under a certain economic lifestyle. And he's like 2 years in, he's like almost in this depression, because like, I don't want to do this forever, but I see my dreams slipping further and further away from me, because now I have a family. Now I have this.
Right.
And so it is, I think when we start talking about this, and that's kind of what we're talking about today, is this idea of purpose, but it's this thing that I feel like people feel like it is so, it's almost like you can't touch it. It's so far away, or it's this abstract idea, and it's complicated, right? I think we overcomplicate what purpose really is. And so, I know your story has kind of like that journey to it, where you were like, hey, I'm going to be, didn't you say you wanted to be like a chaplain for the military?
I did. And so my story, I can tell you now, I'm 38, I'll be 39 in June, that I know my purpose in life is to help bring people together to understand Jesus. I'm a community builder, and I want to point people to Christ. That is what I'm called to do. Now, what that's looked like throughout the years are vastly different things. And, sometimes in life you go through seasons of understanding your purpose at different levels. But at first I thought that I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, be an officer, and then get out and use the GI Bill to become a chaplain. I wanted to become a chaplain because I was so afraid of working in that church, because I never really saw churches like Generation, life-giving churches where you walk in on a Tuesday, there's people who are excited to come to work, they're filled with passion, they're relevant to life. I didn't see that. I grew up in church, respected the church, but I never saw my place in it. And so I thought, wow, I want to go in the world's biggest youth group. And 75% of the people who are in the military, they're the ages 18 through 30. And they're in a season of life where they're starting to own the reins to their life. They're given opportunity, they're given money, and they're trying to figure out where they're going to go. And I was like, man, I want to do that. And so right now, someone's getting sold to being a chaplain. I guarantee you. Someone's like, oh, that's it. That's what I want to do. And so I thought that was it. And I was serving in my church, and I was a banker during the day, and we moved from Hilton Head Island to Charlotte, North Carolina in pursuit of that dream. And along the way, God brought an opportunity to step on staff at Elevation, which was unexpected for me. And in part, it was kind of a crazy thing because I had wrapped up this whole thought of the military and ministry all wrapped up in one. And so when I met you 12 days in, and I'm the new guy at this church, I was grateful to be a part of it, but then also my first step into purpose didn't look like what I thought it was going to look like.
Wow.
And so many times when you think you're stepping into purpose, it's like, oh wow, I'm going to wake up every day, feel fulfilled. It's going to be peaceful because God is in it. And then if you want to go in ministry, you lie and say, well, oh man, Christians are easy to work with. I mean, there's no one who's going to be self-promoting. There's no pride. There's no problems. It's just going to be everyone holding hands, praying all day. And then I stepped in and I got hit in the face with the reality of what purpose feels like. And sometimes purpose, walking in it, it can really feel pointless.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, and you said it, man. I kid you not. If you've not been in ministry long enough to tell yourself, hey, I would probably work at McDonald's tomorrow if they called. I don't know if you've been doing it right. I don't know if you've been in ministry long enough. Because
that is a great point, and I'd love for you to even talk about that, like as you stepped out of that season where you went
back into the corporate world. Because for me, I think that's why purpose is so confusing for people, because they think once I discover it, it's going to be this feeling. Like, I think they're confusing purpose with this feeling of fulfillment.
Yes.
Instead of understanding that anywhere through Scripture, people that lived out purpose walked through a lot of pain.
For sure.
A lot of mistakes, a lot of figuring things out, right? And so I'd love for you to even talk about like how you went from there to Elevation, and then you're like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing the ministry thing, but then God calls you to the corporate world.
So I had the opportunity to serve at Elevation for just under 8 years, and it was a really amazing experience. God really grew me through a lot of different seasons, good, bad, ups, downs, all that kind of stuff. And probably about about a year before I left, God just started challenging me in my quiet time. Do you trust me, or do you trust the place where I placed you? And that was a really just shocking thing. I was like, I trust you. And he just started straight up waking me up in the middle of the night with a burden to go back into the corporate world, but do something in the world of ministry.
Yeah.
And it didn't make sense. And I just kind of prayed and sat on it. And then 1 month I got 7 job offers out of nowhere. It was just really weird.
Yeah.
And one of them was the job I ended up going to. It's a company called Polydeck, and really great Christian company. They make materials for the mining world, to sum it up really quickly, but they wanted me to come on as their global carrying manager, which was literally a guy who had business background, but who also was a pastor. So it was like one of those things where God specifically said, oh, this is what you need to do. And so he made it really clear, and I took that step. But then when I took that step, it came with its own list of problems.
Yeah.
And then what I realized is whether you're working in the corporate world, you're working at home, or you're working in ministry, every single place can be filled with purpose, and every single place is filled with problems. And if you're searching for fulfillment as a feeling, you will never find it. But if you search for fulfillment as a decision, and then watching the fruit of what God's doing, then that's an amazing thing. And so my 2.5 years at Polydeck was amazing. God used me, and I was able to see things I would have never seen. But what I've learned is that when God calls you into purpose, his path to use you will oftentimes look like completely different than what you think.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you've felt that, seen that in your life, where you thought that purpose was this destination, but it's really this journey of God saying, this season you're going to do this. The next season you're going to do that. And it could be vastly different seasons in the same place.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to look like the big shifts that I've seen in my life. But I've just learned so much through those seasons.
I think it was Rick Warren I forget. I think he was on Carrie Newhoff's podcast or something. But I thought it was such an interesting. Like the thing that I learned most from his, because he's getting ready to transition, from his church and which is incredible what he's been able to accomplish, in the I guess it's like 40 something years.
40 something years.
Yeah. And but here's what was cool about that. It's like you're talking about Rick Warren here, right? I mean, he wrote a book that basically just launched him. I mean, it's like the top selling book of all time or something crazy like that. And he said that he had the same prayer for 40 years every Saturday on his way to church. And that was, "Today, God, I give you my resignation." That if you want me to resign today so that you could use me into something else, I give that to you.
Wow.
And he said, but it set him free from this idea of who I am is tied to this title or role or this success or whatever it is. Because I think even some people from the outside looking in, they're like, man, I'd love to have that. Because they correlate that with some sort of purpose, right?
Yeah. In your little library over there's a book called Good to Great. And it's written by this amazing guy, Jim Collins. And then afterwards he wrote another book called How the Mighty Fall. And it's this book about great companies that were once the center of the market. Now they're not relevant. So the Blockbusters, the Nokias, the Circuit Cities of the world, how did they at one time be the absolute definition of their industry but then lose it? And one of the reasons why is the hubris of success or pride. When you get so caught up in who you think you are, then you start to lose perspective on what got you there. So this team of accountants in the early 90s, they went to General Motors and said, "Hey, if we keep spending money the way we do, in the early 2000s, we'll need a government bailout." They predicted the bailout. We're going to go bankrupt.
That's crazy.
And you know what the executive said? They said, "We're General Motors. We print money. That's what we do."
Wow.
And sent those accountants out their way. But that hubris of success, and I think that's why it's so important to not be so tied to the title. And sometimes I always listen as a skeptic sometimes because I'm like, well, if Pastor Brandon Petty's got the title and he's telling me not to hold it so tightly, well, why doesn't he give it to an intern and see what happens,
Yeah.
But the reason why he's trying to give us that wisdom is that when you hold so tightly to it, then you are bound by what you think that title should be, should drive, should wear, should act, should respond, and before you know it, you lose perspective on what you have.
Yeah. So now walk us through, you've been at Polydeck, how long were you there?
2.5 years.
And you guys had to move for that job, correct?
Yes.
And so you moved from Charlotte to...
Yes. Spartanburg, South Carolina. If you don't know where it is, that's fine.
So then, and so then you walk through the season of, hey, God may be calling me back into full-time ministry.
Absolutely.
That season.
So we had the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and that rocked me personally because when I saw the picture of him, he looks like me. He was wearing that picture of him in the polo and that hat with the big smile. I have that polo in my closet, and I grew up in the South, and I know that pressure of like, oh, I think I'm in the wrong spot. And then that was crazy. And then George Floyd, and then watching the riots, and then COVID, and then all those seasons, I just started sensing in my spirit that I was a leader out of place. And I don't know if you're watching your kid's basketball game and the coach is like flubbing it and you're like, oh man, get out the way, I'm gonna do it. You ever feel that way? You're out of place, or mom, you're at the grocery store and you see some mom neglecting their child, and then you're like, man, if that was my child, and so I just started feeling that sense I was out of place. And I had a conversation with one of my mentors, and he just asked me, he's like, have you ever thought about going back in ministry? And I was like, man, I didn't even know what that looked like. And I didn't know it, but God moved me from full-time ministry to actually minister to my dad. And so my dad and my stepmom moved in, and I didn't know that I was taking care of him for the last year of my life. But I went through about a year of interviewing for different churches, and 7 different amazing churches that I ended up saying no to. And that was really weird because I knew that God was calling me back into ministry, and it's just really surreal to have to say no to the thing you want. I don't know if you've ever had to say no to a good thing, believing for a great thing, but there's no guarantee of that. And so that was the process, and that was really painful for both me and my wife, because when you're going to a church, you're really considering, am I moving here? I've got 4 kids, and are they going to fit in? And you're looking at houses, and you're trying to look at the staff of saying, hey, that guy over there, could I actually have dinner with him on a Saturday? And it's just a really weird process. And we went through 7 no's, and then God made it really plain for the 8th one to be our yes, and we're grateful for that. But yeah, that season was really a growing season that was painful. And I think that's the hard part about purpose, is to really keep being effective. You have to be willing to grow, which means that you have to do hard things that you may not want to do. And so I didn't know that going to Spartanburg, serving at Polydeck would be a growth season that was painful, but it was amazing. I loved it. It was great, but it was also hard sometimes.
Well, I remember you even asking for prayer, and it was like, is it Dallas? Is it Baltimore? Is it Charlotte? It was
just ridiculous.
That was wild, man. But even with that, I think so many people, it's again, all they see is the fruit of your life. But I would say even going back into ministry, you had what's called a separation season, right?
Yes.
Because I tell people, one of the most valuable things that happened in my life, I was in student ministry before starting this church, and there's something about almost this disconnect when you're in full-time ministry if you're not careful of the real world, you know what I mean? And so I had to go work a couple of part-time jobs for about 1.5 years to almost 2 years before we started the church. But it was for some reason, it was this most life-giving moment, because it was this is every day with real, not people coming to work faking it every day. Because there were broken people in the church, but it was but I work for a church. You know what I mean? And that's the stuff the challenge I face now with the staff here, because I'm trying to get them to be hey, you don't have to play any games here.
Right.
Because we're actually walking through something with our staff called the Leader's Journey, but it's this whole idea of saying hey, the biggest problem in the church world most of the time is that we are reaching broken people, but the problem is we are also broken. And there's sometimes no outlet for that.
So good.
And so maybe what are some things that you learned going back into that world that brought you a fresh perspective?
I think I actually did a Teaching for Generations staff one day when Pastor Brandon was gone, about the 6 things every church should know about being in church ministry, and I can't remember the 6, but one of the things I'll say is reminding yourself that miraculous work feels mundane. So there's no spiritual way around getting your emails to 0. Just it's not about if you feel it or not.
Select all.
So yes,
delete.
Select all, delete, and let the people do what they need to do. There's no spiritual way about keeping yourself in a healthy rhythm where you're teaching or you're using. So some things are just take work. So that's one thing I've just learned is hey, don't over spiritualize it. Just knock it out. Another thing is if you don't have time in your schedule for the people that you say you're serving, then you are an ineffective leader.
That's so good.
And I learned that with I was trying to get in front of some of my sales team at Polydeck, and one guy was like, "Hey, bro, nice talking to you on the phone, but I got work to do," and he hung up on me. And I remember realizing that my call wasn't making him money, and because it wasn't making him money, he knew that it wasn't a priority for him. Now that's a whole other thing, so I'm allowing that. But that principle stuck with me is, if we are called to share the Great Commission full time, if we are called to serve people full time, if I'm a children's ministry director, or if I'm a worship leader, or if I'm a tech guy, or if I'm a graphics art designer, but I do not spend time with my end user, then I am growing in my ineffectiveness as a leader. And so if your schedule does not have time where you're meeting with your end user, you're wasting ultimate time in church.
Well, I think that is where people confuse gift with purpose too, because they think that if I've discovered my purpose, I'm going to be always using my gift, right? And the problem is, you might be growing your gift, but you're also growing distant from the relationships of people who even need the gift in the first place, right? And so I always tell people that I'm called to lead this church, but how that is accomplished, there are things that I love about what I do, and there are things that I have to do.
For sure.
Because it's a part of leading, right? And so it's like, I don't always just get to sit and read scripture all the time and read through an entire leadership book in a day and do all these things. There are meetings I have to be a part of that aren't 100%. Necessarily like my passion, but it's still a part of my purpose. And I think that's why people get so hung up too, is because they're thinking, man, when I find my purpose, I'm going to be just doing the thing all day long. But there is so much that comes along with that too. Talk to us about like some of the struggles that you've had coming back into full-time ministry that you didn't foresee.
Struggles I didn't foresee. I think, so my season now looks different because my role is different, and I didn't foresee when your season changes, then that means your preparation has to change. And so I'm in a season where I've had to change workflow. I've had to do things differently. But I think the biggest struggle is what are the healthy habits that I'm going to make sure I prioritize so I can do the thing that I am built to do. And so for me, that looks like the prayer regimen. It does look like making sure that I'm meeting with people in the congregation. And that also means that I'm meeting with the teams and I'm supporting them, loving them, but then also making sure that they're going where we need to go. And so my job feels like I'm flying a fighter jet, and at any moment I could be flying 300 feet off the ground or 40,000 feet off the ground. And so at any moment I could have any one of those hats. And so I think the struggle right now is making sure that I'm owning what is the most important thing I'm going to do, and then being comfortable with the fact that I didn't do X, Y, Z. And so I like to be able to do all things, but just like you, we all have finite time. And one of my biggest priorities right now is to make sure I get home, because I've got 4 children and I've got a short window of my life where I can invest who God's called me to be in them.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at, because there was probably a version of Joel, 4 or 5 years before that, that was like, hey, we can't necessarily run like we ran here.
1,000%.
How do I run better?
That's
here?
good.
You know what I mean?
So that's really helpful. So when I came on staff at Elevation, me and my wife, we had no kids, and we just jumped all in, which is good.
It's happened all at one time.
Happened all at one time. Boom. Yeah. But then as we started having kids, we adjusted raising parents to our ministry instead of figuring out how to adjust ministry to the new calling of being a parent. And in doing that, there was always another person in our house, another person in our marriage called Elevation. And it wasn't the organization of Elevation, it was our management of that. So it wasn't the organization's fault. It was our misinterpretation of our calling. So this is when I think it's in Exodus, but Moses' father-in-law comes to see him at work one day and realizes that he's sitting there all day judging all these people. And he's like, man, what are you doing is not good. And his father-in-law helped him see his calling in a new way, which was like, yeah, you're called to lead these people, but you're not called to do everything. And so coming back into ministry this season, I've got some huge parameters now where I'm like, if I'm not leaving by 5, that's a problem. I do not have to be at every meeting, but I do need to make sure that I'm strategically at the right places. I'm serving people well, loving them. And also, what's really different in this season is I'm coming in at Seacoast at a different level that I did at Elevation.
Yeah.
And so I'm working hard to earn trust. And
That's
obviously that takes years to earn,
Yeah.
but that's something that's a whole new level of a season. And
That's so good. Let's talk about just briefly this idea of, because it was cool. There was actually her name's Valerie Parker. She sent in an email asking this question. I thought it was a really good question, but it's like, how do you know you missed your purpose? You know, I think some people think that maybe purpose is this idea of like, I have to choose the right path, but if I choose the wrong path, I blew it.
Wow.
Right? Because I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yes.
You know, like I think that's the pressure. Even, and I feel like I have a sophomore in high school right now, and she's already feeling the weight of like, I still don't know what to do after high school, right? And I think there's this pressure we put on high schoolers especially of like, you need to figure everything out about your life when you graduate.
What do you do when you graduate?
Yeah. And, you know, and of course, you know, it has to involve college, it has to involve this. Like, there's a certain path I think people just think this is the path we're supposed to walk down. So what's your thoughts? If you had somebody out there who's listening right now, because I think this is even a deeper discussion, and this is a whole other episode, but especially with men, most people don't realize like that suicide rates are so high in men.
Right.
And especially guys who, you think about the guys who go to the NFL, professional sports, you know, the length of their career is so small, and there's so much life after their quote unquote purpose, right?
Yes.
And most of them find themselves in this pit of depression, whether it's going bankrupt financially or just feeling like, oh, I don't have a purpose anymore.
Yes.
So what's your thoughts on that?
So if you ever start listening to the autobiographies, the stories of really successful people, you'll realize that there are some common threads on what makes people successful. You know, hard work, consistency, drive, passion, But then also you realize that how many of them stepped into, quote, their purpose on accident. Clint Eastwood was flying off the coast of California, getting ready to go, I think it was to Korea, and as a private in the Army, and his plane crashed. He was one of 2 survivors that swam a mile offshore, and because of that accident, he got discharged from the Army and decided to act.
Wow.
Condoleezza Rice, the first Secretary of State, the first African American Secretary of State was a female. She got asked by one of her students at Stanford. After she was Secretary of State, she went to be a professor at Stanford, where she went to school. They asked her, "How did you become Secretary of State? What's the pathway to that?" And she said, "Well, you have to be a failed piano player." Her freshman year, she went to college, and she wanted to be a professional piano player, and realized quickly that she wasn't good at it. But a friend told her, "Hey, why don't you take this Russian history class? It's kind of cool." And when she stepped in and learned about Russian history, she got sucked into it, learned the language, became fluent in it, and then became a special advisor to George Bush on the country of Russia in the 80s, and that was her first foray into the government world.
Wow.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wanted to be a professional football player and failed at that. And he's a 3rd-generation wrestler. And when he told his dad, "Hey, I want to wrestle," his dad said, "You are throwing your life away." And I can go down the list of really amazing people who thought they threw away their purpose by making a wrong step, but were actually stepping into it. Moses, he always was called by God to be a liberator of the people, but in his own power, he killed a man. And that's a great side note. that one of the best ways to step into your purpose is stop making it about you and stop making you drive your own things and saying, hey, God, I think this is my purpose. I'm going to be faithful where I'm at. I'm going to look and see what's out there, but I'm going to trust you more than trust me, and he'll open up way more doors. But Moses, he thought he was stepping into his calling by protecting this Egyptian. He killed him, and then instead of getting props from the Israelites, they started, what, you gonna kill me too?
Yeah.
And then he went running for 40 years.
40 years.
40 years as a shepherd. Was he losing his purpose? Was he running from his purpose? No. Because when God called him in the burning bush and said, I called you, he actually used those 40 years in the desert to lead 1 million Israelites in how to live in the desert. And so many times in your life, you think that you're having a misstep, but God's training process in your life is custom fitted for your purpose. So for someone who's out there who feels like they missed their step, you need to go back to Proverbs chapter 3, 5, and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. It's plural.
I love it.
And so the thing that God specializes in is using broken people. The thing that God is really good at is knowing who you are and the fact that you're broken.
Yeah.
And he specializes in saying, yeah, I use all that mess up stuff, and now I've formed you for a purpose. You do not look at a spoon and say that it is broken. If you try to cut with a spoon, you do.
Yeah.
But if you realize that it's bent for a purpose, then you realize what it can be used for. And just like Pastor Brandon, just like me, and just like you who are listening today, you're bent for a purpose.
So good. Man, it's so good. Joseph, right? Like, even the people that say, like, well, I didn't choose my life.
No one does.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, look at Jesus, right? I mean, for 30, I mean, we don't get a lot of detail, but
in the dark,
something tells me that he wasn't a terrible carpenter. Right? I mean, the Bible says at 12 that he was like growing in stature and in favor with God, people and God, right? Like, I heard this quote one time, I thought it was so good. Like, sometimes your job is your mission, but sometimes your job is your mission field. And I think so many people are not faithful in what they're currently doing because they're too busy longing for what they wish they were doing.
Right. I didn't know that God was using me as a banker to prepare me to be a pastor. I didn't know that my training process was praying over the seats in my bank before people got there. I didn't know that was a spiritual thing that pastors should be doing to be a shepherd. I didn't know when I was closing the door on a loan application, someone tells me about their divorce, I was praying for them, that I was pastoring them.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the training process that God will put you under, it looks stupid to everybody else.
Yes.
But for you, it's custom fitted.
Bro, in high school, like, it's crazy too because some of these things are birthed out of even like unhealthy things.
For sure.
So growing up, and I have this huge insecurity, this need for affirmation, and so the way that I dealt with being picked on and things like that when I was younger is I was like, okay, I'm going to be the class clown, right? I'm going to be the guy. If I can get you off my back by making you laugh, then that's what I would do. And so I ended up leading the drama club in high school. So I'm like a part of these plays. And all of this stuff had nothing to do with it. I love doing these things. It was everything about like, man, I need something for people to like say you're good enough or whatever. Had no idea that what God was developing in me was this gift that he would later use to be able to stand in front of people and proclaim the gospel. So good. Where I used to, it was like, hey, I'm going to use this gift to try to bring some sort of security to myself. And so I think so many people, I think Pastor Stephen actually did a message on this one time that God's will is whatever. I don't know if you remember that.
Yep, I do remember that.
But, it's whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord.
And, some things are a function of time. And for the people that are really successful, there really is no such thing as overnight success.
Yeah.
Think about Justin Bieber. Well, there are years when he was learning his craft that no one saw him. Yeah. And he came on the scene at such a young age. He grew up in front of us. But you don't take away the decade that it learns to master something. Yeah. And sometimes what I've just learned is sticking with something that God has built you with is just, it's hard, it's painful because it looks great to run. Yeah. But if you can just stay on it, then you can start to see fruit.
That's so good. And that really is, I mean, it's crazy too, because the scriptures tell us, like, you know, if you are faithful with the small things, you may ruler of many, right? And I think the biggest issue with people not discovering purpose wherever they see is that they're just not faithful with the now.
Yes.
They want tomorrow to come, but not realizing that what you're doing today is going to actually build what's tomorrow.
I had a guy ask me questions about communicating to people this week. And at best, I'm like a D-level communicator. There's a lot better people. You need to just learn from Pastor Brandon Petty. Yeah. But I really laughed when he said it, because I was like, you don't know the first time I got on stage and I had a 5-minute clock, and about a minute 20 seconds in, I ran out of content, and I'm just staring at 600 people in the crowd. I'm like, rapture happened now.
Yeah.
Take me now. Can I die now? And so sometimes the people that you see have the gift that you think is natural. Yeah. They just failed a whole lot. They just failed a whole lot. And so I think one of the things about purpose that I think we can't hide from people are the scars that it takes to just get back up again.
Yeah.
You know, when you got out there, you thought you were being used by God, or you thought you were stepping into your purpose, and you don't get the commission you thought you were.
Yeah.
You prayed over it.
Yeah.
Like, you did the work, and the guy said, well, I'm going to go with somebody else.
Yeah.
Or you prepared yourself to be married, and you saved yourself, and then the dude doesn't propose. Like, that happens sometimes, and that's okay. As long as you get back up again. When you let your failure define you, you are stepping out of your purpose.
I love that you talked about how, like, people dismiss the dark days, right?
Yes.
Because, like, I'm not a country music fan.
Come on.
I love documentaries, and there's a documentary on Garth Brooks.
Okay.
And so I'm like, dude, I mean,
successful.
I want to
objective.
know. I mean, like, this guy, obviously labeled one of the most incredible entertainers of all time or whatever. So I'm like, I want to hear this dude's story, and your jaw drops, because it's like, sometimes you do, when you look at somebody else's success, you're like, oh, it just kind of happens, you know, they're just awesome. But I mean, the dude moved to Nashville, back to Oklahoma like 2 or 3 times, living in a house full of, you know, roommates. He has his wife and other roommates trying to make it in music, that people are like record labels are telling him, you are not good enough to do this.
Yep.
And it's just like, your mind gets blown, because it's like, you're watching this guy who, like, rules the entertainment world.
Right.
And you're like, what?
Most people can't see your gift until after it's developed. And so if you're looking for external confirmation, just know that it will happen few and far between.
Yeah.
And I read Kevin Hart's autobiography, and it's called, I can't make this stuff up. And obviously it's going to be funny, but then it's also a great reminder of how people step into success. And he got rejected from a bunch of people the first time he went to Hollywood. Spent 7 years on the road. 7 years every year, traveling from one side of America to the other side. And then doing that 7 years.
Yeah.
And then through that 7-year season, he built his social media from 0 to, I think, a few million. He released his first comedy thing on Netflix. He invested $3 million of his own money.
Wow.
And then when he went back to Hollywood the second time, the same people who rejected him were telling him, oh man, you're such a fresh new hit. And he's like, hey, you don't remember me, but 7 years ago, you told me I was the worst thing ever.
Wow.
And so he's like, it took me 7 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
And so many times you just see someone, quote, pop up on the scene, but you do not know the seasons of failure.
Well, even put that into a ministry context, because I've had people, and I know what they're saying. I'm not saying, I'm not one of those that's like, I show them whatever, but like, I've had people, if they hadn't heard me preach in several years, where they go like, man, like, you've grown. And I'm like, isn't that the point?
That's the whole point.
Because I do talk to people who, and this is what I tell people all the time. 90% of people, I just believe this in my heart, that say they want to start a church. Really, they just want somewhere for somebody to hear their gift.
Yep.
They just want to preach. They don't really want to plant a church or
Right.
pastor a church.
100%.
They just want to preach.
Yes.
I think that's why some people are content with the storefront, 30, whatever. And hey, whatever. But like I tell people all the time, like for me, over the last 10 years of my journey, it's not that I wanted to become a better communicator.
Right.
I wanted God to wreck me in such a way that my love for Him and love for people came out in my communication.
Yes.
I remember I went to see a counselor over some deep wound trauma stuff that happened in my life 5 or 6 years ago. And he said this, I thought this was so good. He's like, when we got done or whatever, like I was telling him what I've learned throughout my sessions, and he's like, I'll tell you this, you will now be a better preacher of the gospel because you have tasted the grace of God firsthand.
That's so good. That's so good.
And I left there, and I've always said this statement to people. I said, I never practice what I preach. I preach what I practice.
That's great.
Because I have pastors all the time. How do you come up with material? And I'm like, I'm not a comedian. I'm not coming up with material. I'm living out this present life, being wrecked by God on a daily basis and being transformed. So out of my transformation, I hope to pass that transformation on.
That's so good.
And that's changed my whole perspective, because it did feel like the first few years, I mean, you feel this pressure of like, how do I be a good communicator, like as good a communicator as Pastor Steve? And you said it before, it's like, I can't just copy and paste. I think even you said this at one time. You said, don't copy what we do, copy the faith.
Yes.
And that wrecked my world. It changed my whole perspective.
Yes. I read this morning in my devotional. Dwight L. Moody suggested the greatest tragedy of his day was that Christian leaders attempted to traffic in unlived truth. Traffic in unlived truth. And
wow.
We started this conversation talking about habit versus harvest.
Yeah.
And if you can get a level of satisfaction in your purpose from doing the things that are most unseen, then that's probably a great step into growing your gift.
Yeah.
So if you desire to have a YouTube and you want to be an influencer, if you don't find a level of satisfaction in understanding editing and what camera angles does and putting the right track and what is your brand, if you don't get satisfaction in that, then you're going to be so frustrated when you put something up there and it doesn't hit the way you do.
Yeah.
Because you're focusing on the harvest, but your habits don't line up with what you need to do to be successful.
That's it.
And so it's just like, man, I think for anyone that does something worthwhile that lasts, there's a level of that preparation that they just really love.
That's so good. Say there's somebody listening and they feel kind of just stuck. They feel lost. What's some advice you would give somebody to help them kind of seek out and find what it is that they feel like their God-given purpose?
One, realize that you probably have more in your hands than you can see. And so, real talk, grab yourself a pen, paper, and say, what has God done in my life?
Yeah.
And when you start to write the history of God's faithfulness in your life, you'll start to see different themes. For the people that you believe in, and they know you believe in you, they believe in you. It could be one person, it could be 20. Ask them, what am I good at? Ask them, because they'll tell you. They'll tell you. And between those two things, praying, asking God to just guide you, you'll start to unstuck yourself. If you really stay consistent with just seeking and not using distractions to delay your healing.
Yeah.
And the easiest thing to do when you feel stuck is to run.
Yes.
Blame it on other people, blame it on where you live, blame it on your job, and then you run from thing to thing to thing versus stopping, turning around and confronting it.
Wow.
And there's a season in my life where I didn't feel like I was going where I wanted to go, and I felt stuck. And the instinct was to run. And holding off on running was probably one of the best things I ever did. And so if you're going to delay anything, delay from running from the problem.
That's so good.
Find a way to step into it.
That's so good. And, I think that's exactly, I mean, it's funny because you're starting to have revelations or realizations as somebody's talking, but like when you said, write down what God's done in your life, like I didn't start preaching because one day I thought, I want to go to seminary, I want to preach the Bible. It actually started, I went to my pastor and was like, hey, I don't know the Bible, but I just want to can I go start a class on Wednesday nights where I just share my story? Because I want to keep people from going down the same path or learn from dysfunction, and that grew a gift in me to where really my communication started out just telling people man, this is what God has done in my life.
Yes.
And that led to a passion to seeing broken people become whole, man.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's so powerful. That's so good.
What are opportunities that came in your life that at first looked like a problem?
Oh, wow. Man.
While you think, I'll tell. I was in this small group in 2006, 2007, and they asked me, "Hey, can you lead one group once?" Because the leader was gone. And at first, I was like, "Why is that my problem?"
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, "I'll try it."
Yeah.
And I didn't know that was my invitation into even understanding what it meant to share God's word. And at first it came as an inconvenience, or someone asked me to serve as a greeter at church, and I was like, I'll do that, but I didn't know that was an invitation into. And so sometimes your first step into purpose looks like an inconvenience. There's another great way of understanding your purpose. What frustrates you? What frustrates you? Because sometimes the things we're frustrated by are the things that we're uniquely gifted in.
That's good.
So one person's going to walk in this room you're in, and they're like, man, he needs to have a mural here. Why? Because they're gifted as an artist. Another person's going to walk in and say, oh, dang, that needs to be in alphabetical order.
That's exactly what my worship pastor said. He's like, oh, what are you doing with your books, man?
See, and probably he has a gift of organization. And then you look around and you see the world in a way that is a consequence of the gift God has given you. It's a prescription. It's like contacts in your eyes. You see the world that way. I walk in a room, I'm like, why isn't that guy talking to that guy? And I'm most satisfied when I'm in a room full of people that shouldn't be together, that are together, they're hanging out. I'm like, I did my job, they're connected, and I walk out. If you come over to my house for dinner and there's a bunch of people, at some point in the night, I'll just disappear. And it's because I get so full of watching my friends have community. I literally need a minute, and it happens every single time. It's too much going on. I gotta go. But that satisfies my soul. And that's something that people won't see. That's not very many people who see the need for community and how to build it. But that's my calling.
I say mine was, I became a believer at 18, and my pastor was like, I was just raw and wanting to be used by God, and he's like, I think he even made up a title for me. It was Sunday School Superintendent. Which means I had to get up there. We had these little booklets with the actual curriculum, and it's oh, this is a devotion. Just read the devotion, ask for prayer requests, pray. But it turned into let me tell you what this devotion said to me. And it'd be up there for 30 minutes, And it's bro, you're supposed to be 10 minutes, But I would say that was a time where I felt I don't really feel like this is something that I'm qualified to do, but it opened the door for me to start, preaching the gospel and saying things. So and I think even I think about my first youth pastor job. I was youth pastor / associate pastor / video editor / creative guy. I was, and all those things seem like just frustrations and problems. But I mean, now I see ministry through a whole new lens because of that experience. I have a creative type mind in certain areas because I was forced into that world a little bit. So I can definitely see how that makes sense.
Right.
But let's talk about 3 keys to victory to help people. This whole podcast is called Made to Win, and I want to help people have victory in their lives, not just survival. I think a lot of people just survive life and don't have victory. So I want to give them victory. And I actually asked you to come up with two of them, but I'll give everybody the first one, and that is, I just want to remind people, don't confuse purpose with calling, because I think there is this broad spectrum that we forget. I tell people all the time, like, I'm called to serve God. That's what I'm called to do. I believe that is my calling. How that is manifested, like, that might mean that I have to do something that's not necessarily my job title tomorrow, but it brings God glory and it serves people.
That's good.
Right? But I think my purpose, is different than that, because my purpose is wrapped up in my gift and those type things. So I would just tell people, like, just because it's not something that is quote unquote, you get to use your gift in the moment, doesn't mean you're too good to step into.
That's good.
Yeah. So
that's good.
Tell us about number 2.
God prepares us for our purpose through the school of life. Remember, God gave you a purpose.
Yeah.
It's His gift He gave to you. And there's a certain level of stewardship that only He can own. Now, where our responsibility is not to allow the school of life to disqualify us, but equip us. And so, failure is only failure if you allow it to be.
Wow.
But get back up again and say, what did I learn from that lesson? Because there's a story through your scars, and when you let God heal you, then you can start using it. But if something in your life isn't healed, then you can't use that gift.
That's it.
And the third thing is, our faithfulness in places unseen is the catalyst for God using us. And so many times when we think about our purpose, we think about being known for it.
Yeah.
But for me, the best sermons I ever want to preach are at the coffees where there's no lights, there's no cameras, there's nobody in front, and it's just me and that person.
Yep.
I get so much from that. I get so much from learning how just to talk and hang out with my kids and speak life into them. And it's always the right time to speak a word of life into someone, but I'm learning that it's in those places that no one can see is where your gift really grows, and then God says, man, I am qualifying that person to be called.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I had one of our new staff members the other day. Because when people say this, they think they're like saying something that's like profound, and it's like, it's really not that big of a deal. But like, he made this comment. He said, man, I don't know how you do it. Like, how do you preaching here, you're doing leadership investment here, you're doing podcasts here, you're doing this, you're that, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't see how you do it. And it's like, that's the point. You don't see the things, the work I'm putting in behind the scenes. Like, I know you're only seeing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But that's where I think that comment about the unseen is so important, because what happens in the unseen is what's going to produce that fruit in the seen.
Here's something I do. If you know someone successful in an area that you want to be, ask them about the unseen things. But if you don't observe it, you can't ask about it. That's why I asked about that blue Dodge Dakota that's outside there.
Yeah.
Because I'm observing. I'm like, oh man, that truck's still around. Hey, how do you do that? What do you do with your money? I ask people that question all the time who I think are successful. If you think someone's successful in the area of faith, hey, what do you do to stay close to Jesus? If you think someone's a great parent, how do you care for your kids the way you do? See someone who works out consistently year in, year out. Hey, what's your habit? I've learned so many different things by just asking people simple questions. And Proverbs talks about wisdom is screaming from the streets. And so if you just attune your ears to asking that question, then you will learn. And even mentors can be mentors from your life from afar, but just be observant. You see an actor you like, you see an entertainer you like, know that they're broken, but then also say, oh man, what can I learn from their life? Oh, I noticed they do this, they do this, they do this, they do this. One of the guys that Pastor Brandon and I both follow is Jocko Willink. And his Instagram is very simple, straightforward, but every day he just takes a picture of his Timex, and it's like 4:45, and then there's a picture of a sweat-stained floor, the aftermath.
The aftermath, that's it.
And that's encouraging for me. And so find people like that. Maybe something you need to do is eliminate distractions from your life. If you're following 1,000 people on Instagram that aren't helping you go where you know you need to go, unfollow them.
My buddy actually gets to the end of his timeline on Instagram. That's how very little people he follows.
I don't know what that is.
I'm like, what is that?
Yes.
I feel like you just made it to the end of the universe. Like, what just happened?
I think that's when you throw your phone down, right?
Well, he finally posted, like, he never posts, and he posted something the other day, and it's like, well, that's great. Like, all 10 people saw that, so that's good. That's good. But no, it's so true. I mean, and then here's what I think so many people miss too, is that who I am today started with things that I didn't necessarily love at the time, but I fell in love with the me that I hadn't met yet.
Right.
And so because there was a version of myself that I wanted to meet, I knew there were things that along the way I had to fall in love with.
And that's why growing in the dark places is so valuable, because only you know what you're actually capable of. Only you know what's inside of you. I saw this picture on Instagram of, it was a guy, he looked like a fat dude, but he had a mallet, and he was like carving out a ripped guy inside of him. Yeah, it was a really interesting visual. I saw that, yeah. And I was like, man, that's such a great example of what life looks like.
That's it.
I got a friend of mine. She is just owned her 4th home, and she's a hustler. And it started with her at first sleeping on friends' couches so she could pay off her student loans.
Wow.
And I was like, how inspirational is that? Like the stuff that kind of scrubs you of some pride. And here's the thing, first step to growth is really scrubbing you of some pride.
That's it.
Like if you want to grow, you got to do some things and say, hey man, I don't know what to do with my money. Hey, I'm going to walk into that gym class and I know I'm the most out of shape person in the room. But don't let pride hold you back from growing.
Man, that's so good, because that's exactly my point. Is like, I think there are people who say, well, I'm not a reader, or I'm not this, I'm not that. And, or even for me, like when you asked about, hey, what do you do with your money? You know, I could have said, well, you know, I'm 35, I'm 40. Like, it's probably too, like, that just sounds overwhelming. That sounds like, you know, I should have learned that at 18 or 21. Right. But it's that pride. I had to swallow pride and be like, you know what? I may not be where I want to be because I didn't make those decisions then, but that doesn't mean it's too late for me to start now. And to teach my kids.
Gosh.
To show them, like, hey, you know what? Your dad didn't have all this. I wasn't equipped with this early on, but I want you to know, like, it's never too late in life to say, you know what? I can swallow my pride and start now. Because it's not just about me. It's about hopefully passing down a legacy of better stewardship, better generosity, better investment opportunities.
So good. A blue Nissan Versa changed my life. Let me tell you why. When I first got married, we lived in this apartment for about, I don't know, a year and a half.
Yeah.
And there was this lady who, in the mornings when I was walking down the stairs to go to work, I'd hop in my car, and she would always be locking her door when I was locking mine. And so I never knew her name. I would always say hi to each other, but we'd walk downstairs at the same time. And I'd walk downstairs to the parking lot to get my car, and she'd be walking to the bus stop. And at the time, I was probably like 28, and she looked like she was late 40s. Always dressed to the nines, walking to the bus stop, day in, day out, season in, season out, rain. It snowed like once a year in Charlotte, but like whatever the weather was, she's always walking to the bus stop. And then one day, probably about a year later, I saw her walk to the parking lot with me, and I saw the blue Nissan Versa, and she was walking in, and she just kind of gave me a sly smile, and I just kind of smiled. We never talked about it, but watching her work for that thing it got me all sorts of emotional, because no one got to see the sacrifice of her working hard for that thing.
Wow.
When you pass her on the interstate, you just see a blue car, but you don't see the days, the weeks, the months, the year of sacrifice to save up for that thing. And I think that your gift is the same way.
Yeah.
Someone's just going to see it on the highway of life and say, oh yeah, Pastor Brandon Petty, pastor, great communicator. Or Susie, great mom. But they don't know the sacrifice that it takes to get there. And that's why having good friends in your world is important.
Yeah.
Because you need people who are going to cheer you on and then say, oh dang, remember when this was just a dream? Like before, I just got here just about an hour or two ago, and I was talking to Pastor Brandon in the auditorium. I was like, You remember, we were just talking about the first time we met. And I remember there's this little crazy look in his eyes that showed determination. And 10 years later, I can still see it there. It's matured, it's got more gray hairs on it, but like the same determination's there. And that's the gift of friends over time. And so if you have bad friends in your life, you need to walk alone for a season.
Yeah.
You need to seek out good people. If there's a guy at work who's steady, but he's not too sexy, you better go and hang out with Ed. Hey Ed, I saw you packed your lunch again. Oh, is that the peanut butter and jelly you eat every day for the last 20 years? Hey man, let's talk. You better go hang out with Ed.
Yeah. And Ed, you might be sexy if you're out there. Who knows?
To God.
Yeah, to God. To God. Well, hey, I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, comments, and stuff like that, you can send it into madetowinpodcast.com. Don't forget, we come out with a new episode the first Tuesday of every month. Follow me on Instagram at bpettygc. Also hook up with me on Facebook. Joel is at Joel Delph, JoelDelph on Instagram.
You can just Google me.
Just Google Joel Delph, man. Just Google him.
Don't go to page 2. Just don't go to page 2. Stay page 1.
But man, thank you guys for joining us. Joel, I can't thank you enough for being willing to come on. I know the podcast is new, and you're the big dog, so you're like, man, you'll be on Joe Rogan soon or something like that.
Nope, wouldn't know what to say on there. I'm like, I like you a lot, and that's all it'd be. He just kicked me out.
That's so funny. But bro, I love you. I'm excited to hear your sermon tonight for our 10-year anniversary.
Hey, can I pray for our listeners today?
I would love that.
Father, I thank you so much that you love us. I thank you so much that you call us son, you call us daughter, and you are not afraid by our mistakes. You are not afraid or intimidated by our mess ups, but you desperately want to walk with us each and every day. I pray for the listener today who doesn't know you or who's struggling to know you. I pray that they will feel your love right now in a special way. And I pray that they'll know that walking with you gives us all power to walk in our purpose. Our purpose isn't elusive. You want us to find it so we can use it. It's a gift you've given us. So help us to find that gift. In Christ let me pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Don't forget, on the Made to Win podcast, we believe that you were made to win, but in order to win, winning starts within.